Serious. Paramedic EMTs of Reddit, what was the creepiest case you've dealt with? Please do like, share, and subscribe. I have been on some creepy and depressing calls. One particular call that I remember was getting dispatched to a 96-year-old female with rectal bleeding. It was almost 6 a.m., and when we entered the residence, the woman was yelling, "He raped me," over and over again. Finally, the story came out that she had gone outside to get her paper, and some guy had emerged and followed her inside, raped her anally, stole all her medications, and then fled. I can't give away too many details, but I certainly believed what she was saying. We were trying to convince her to go to the ER, and she was adamant that she would not go. We kept pressing her and then said, "My son's funeral is in 4 hours. I can't miss it." That moment really hit me hard. Never followed up with it. First run I ever had, we got a call for a pedestrian hit by a dump truck on the highway. Got there, and there was a black Subaru on the shoulder with the driver's side door open and a note taped to the steering wheel that just said, "I'm so sorry." This 24-year-old girl had committed suicide by jumping in front of a dump truck going 70 miles per hour. Got a call for a hemorrhage in the early morning one shift last summer. When we arrived, we found a woman in her early 70s who had bled out within the time of our arrival. According to the husband and son-in-law on scene, they stated that she was picking at her dialysis port in her clavicle region. They said she pulled it out, but were very interested in how quickly they were going to do something with the body, and neither were fazed whatsoever. It was the most maroon blood just pooled around her, and they didn't bat an eye. Asked some other uncomfortable questions, and we then turned the scene over to the sheriff's office. We were all a bit skeptical that one of them pulled it out, seeing as she stayed under their care 24/7 if she wasn't in a dialysis appointment. Who knows? U.S. Army medic with EMT certification here. One call that will always haunt me was on an unresponsive female at around 0300 in the morning. We get there and do some pointless CPR along with the fire department. Of course, it's pointless. She had been dead for a while. No shockable rhythm and clear rigor mortis. But the most disturbing part, the original caller was her 11-year-old daughter, who had just spent 3 days with her mother's corpse and called because she was lonely. Also, didn't help that the victim was completely naked when we arrived. Okay, colleagues, no offense, but you guys need to turn the creep factor up a notch. The first time I ever had someone dancing naked and bloody on top of a police car during a psychotic breakdown was an eye-opening experience to a rookie. That guy got his blood all over me and ruined my new jacket. He kept staring at me maniacally, constantly repeating random numbers and saying, "I am Satan," over and over again. It's kind of weird how quickly that sort of run-on-call becomes routine. I had another psych patient early in my career that sticks with me for gross-out factor. She was an Asian lady in her 60s, but swore that she was a 15-year-old girl. She would keep saying the most morbid and grotesque things over and over. I don't remember exact details, but she did talk about being raped repeatedly and having her skull caved in that morning. Then she started going on about how I've been bleeding out of my vagina every single day for the last 3 years. I asked her if she was currently bleeding because vaginal hemorrhage is a legitimate medical complaint, and who knows, she very well could have been raped. At that point, she removed a bloody maxi pad and threw it at me, smacking me square in the chest. My partner erupted in laughter and said, "Dude, that is the most disgusting thing I've ever seen." On a Halloween, about 4 years ago, I was working a shift with a good buddy of mine, and we got a run for an unknown medical. We were a couple of cocky mid-20-somethings. On the way up the elevator, we got caught up in an argument over A's versus Giants Bay Area baseball. We almost blew off the security guard when he was opening the door to some random apartment. "Oh, she's definitely dead," the guard said, and we instantly like, "What?" Usually the cops get to this sort of thing before us, plus we had no idea a dead body was involved. Yet there she was, reclined in a lazy boy with her feet up all the way in a position of comfort. Her eyes were rolled back and mouth agape, just like in the movies. Over her head was a translucent plastic bag taped neatly around her neck. I don't know if it was the combination of reclined death in the lazy boy, a nonchalant plastic bag, a possible murder, or the fact that it was Halloween, but that was a creepy scene. I think we actually had a shooting and a stabbing on that shift as well. In general, the creepiest calls for me are hangings. Something about a body just hanging listlessly in the dark. The last one I had, we were dispatched to without lights and sirens, which itself was weird. We ended up at a Safeway with a bunch of cops who had no idea where the hanging was. Apparently, the guy who called it in was casually shopping in the produce section. This guy mentions to us the body was at the construction site across the street. Needless to say, we told the guy to show us where now. Sure enough, there was a well-executed hanging about 5 feet off the ground. Good rope rigged over a facade and tied to cement blocks on the other side of a chain-linked fence. Seeing a dead body hanging in the dead of night is one of those things that stays with you. You keep it in your back pocket so you can tell the story later when someone asks about the job. I have a few other stories I wanted to share, but this turned into a giant wall of text faster than I expected. Thanks to anyone who reads this. In some weird way, it's kind of nostalgic to think about old times and shifts. Police officer here. If a paramedic goes on a creepy call, we usually show up too. Worst I ever saw was a suicide via slit wrists. This woman was clearly struggling mentally. She went into her basement and started sawing at her wrist horizontally with a rusty hacksaw, bleeds a good amount, and then starts walking around the house. She wasn't dying quick enough, so she sat down in a chair in the middle of the living room and started going at her wrist again, this time with a pair of scissors. I was the second person inside the house. It looked like a massacre. We searched the house top to bottom, fully expecting to find multiple dead bodies in there. I've never seen so much blood in my life. Every single room had a trail of blood in it. The woman was found on a chair in the living room. Rigor mortis had contorted her body into a really strange, unnatural pose, and her face was haunting, literally the stuff of nightmares. Her wrists had huge chunks of skin, veins, muscle missing from them. Saying she slit her wrist is inaccurate. She ripped them to pieces. Thought I had told this before, but didn't see it in my post history, so here it is. Had a call around 9 o'clock, just after I came on duty, of an elderly male with possible high fever. Not a whole lot of info, as the caller was his elderly wife, who according to the dispatcher was hard to understand. Anyway, we head out, get there 7 minutes or so later. As we go in, the wife is sitting at the kitchen table just inside the door, so we ask her what's going on. She answers that he has been complaining he is too hot all morning. We go into the next room, which is dark due to curtains covering the windows, but there's enough light to see a dead man sitting in a chair. Now, mind you, he was not recently dead. I'm talking blackened face, rot, rat bites around the mouth. Wasn't complaining, this morning type of dead. I set down my equipment, and my partner goes to turn on the light next to his chair so we can verify the obvious. As she goes to reach for the light, the dead man groans and reaches for her hand. After collectively shitting our pants, we jump into action. Come to find out, he was on oxygen and a smoker. He was complaining about being hot because he was literally burning up. What looked like signs of death on his face were scorch marks and melted plastic. And, to answer the obvious question, I don't know. He was still alive when we got him to the hospital, and I never asked what happened to him after that. Old story, but still gets me after a long time. The call was for an older man lying in bed. When we get there, the smell is horrendous of a dead body. There are millions of flies everywhere, and yes, there is a living little old lady lying in the bed about 5 feet away. There's a body covered up by a sheet. The longer story is the lady was a dementia patient, and the husband was the primary caregiver. And based on the number of flies and state of decomposition, the police estimated the guy's been dead for about 3 weeks. The woman must have been getting some food out of the refrigerator, but it was totally empty at that time. The creepy part, on the way to the hospital with the woman, she said, "I hope that nice man on the floor is okay." The incident became known as the one with Maggot Man. Not an EMT paramedic, but I am a firefighter and therefore a first responder. This is the story of how I responded to a call involving the Antichrist. I was just getting off of work when a call goes out across dispatch saying that there was a possible overdose and that we needed to respond. We get to the scene and note nothing out of the ordinary until we enter the home. After asking where the patient is, we're escorted to a back room with a man exiting and rebuttoning his pants. We enter the room to a sheriff's deputy detaining a petite, naked woman who has attempted to jump out of a window and has shit herself. She had flung both blood and shit everywhere. She tells her mother, the owner of the home that's been very helpful, that she has a parasite inside her and that she doesn't blame her mother for letting her father rape both of them. The paramedics then enter the scene and attempt to administer sedatives via IV to calm this woman who has claimed the only drugs she's on are Prozac and a little weed. The most memorable moment came next. In the moment that the deputy released her hand to the paramedics to administer the IV, the patient slides her entire hand into her rectum. She then begins to spasm violently and tells us if we don't stop being racist, she will smite us because she is the Antichrist, the harbinger of the end of times. It all ended when I was given a second pair of handcuffs to bind her ankles. I was in the metaphorical blast zone of the Antichrist's ass, and therefore terrified for my life. All went well, thankfully, and I was spared the brown death. I was then called back to let the paramedics handle her. To this day, I've never dealt with anyone quite like the Antichrist. TLDR. The Antichrist shit herself and called me racist while resisting sedation. Probably not too scary, but even looking back on it now, this gives me the willies. I was a student at the time, third manning with my team member leader and a medic. We got called to an overdose, went flying over there on blues. We arrive at the house and find a man and a woman in frosty silence. On questioning, it turns out the dude called the ambulance because she said she would overdose during an argument. Things get a little heated, and we ask the guy to leave for a few minutes while we chat to the lady. There was a whole unfortunate backstory to this lady, which was irrelevant for the story, but suffice to say, she was a nice woman with some problems who was just trying to do right by her kids. We double-checked with her when we had some privacy that there hadn't been any violence, and she said there hadn't that day or before. The creepy part was when the dude came back in. I was kind of redundant here. My team leader was talking to them about the situation. The medic was making notes about the meds this lady has. I wasn't doing anything productive. It didn't need the three of us. I was watching the fucking guy. They were small things that just put me on edge. He was saying he'd keep a hold of her meds so she wouldn't OD. It didn't seem like it simply caring. He made a big deal of, well, we've had all this fuss now and these fine people could be out saving lives, when he was the one that called the ambulance. His entire demeanor seemed to be trying to convey affection and caring. At one point, he tried to put his arm around her. She didn't react. He moved in closer. She still didn't react. He moved closer still. She's outright ignoring him now. He kinda squeezed her. Only a little. In another situation, it might have been fine, but it just seemed so out of place. He did a little while he did it. Straight afterwards, he looked me right in the eyes, then moved away and lit a cigarette. I consider myself well adjusted. So far, I've been able to deal with the creepy hallucinations of the mentally ill, the gore, the dealing with death. Something about that moment of eye contact shook me to my core. There was never enough to act on, not enough to report to social services or the police or anything like that, but I still think about her every now and again. I hope she's okay. I don't know if this counts as creepy or not, but it's a good one. This was also one of my rookie calls, probably like the fourth or fifth one I ever had. We got a call for a male in his early 30s with heavy groin trauma, exact words of the dispatcher. We roll up, lights and sirens, and the guy is waiting for us on the front step with a towel over his crotch. We barely come to a stop, and the guy's already running towards the rig holding this towel. I asked him what was wrong, and he moved the towel, and this guy's dick was just barely hanging on. Apparently, he had lady problems, so he decided to fornicate with a food mixer he had in his kitchen and accidentally turned it on. So, we get him in the rig, and it was bleeding everywhere, and I had to stop it. So I do the best I could, and tried not to cause any more damage, because it was so bad, I thought if we hit a bump too hard, this guy's dick was going to come off. I'll never forget my partner was dying laughing in the front of the rig the entire way to the hospital. Kinda heard a chuckle, so I look in the mirror, and tears are just streaming down the guy's face. He can barely hold it in, he was laughing so hard. He tried his best to remain professional, but it didn't really work. There's a few. It's fairly common in my city for newborn babies to be wrapped in a plastic bag and placed in a gym bag or backpack. Desperate mothers, who are often victims of rape, feel they have nowhere to turn and can't afford a child. The first time I had to examine a DOA newborn in such a condition was an eye-opener. They often don't cut the cord and the placenta will still be attached. Bear in mind that this is in the African heat, and it can be a while before anyone notices the bag in the first place. I've been kicked in the head by a young lady out of her mind on Niobe, who believed she was a demon sent to kill 100 people. We fished her out of a municipal swimming pool at around 0100 in the middle of winter. It took 3 cops and 2 firefighters to hold her down while my ALS sedated her. Also, took far more than we would have thought to knock her out. When she looked me in the eyes and told me that I'm doomed and she was going to kill me was quite strange. Attended a structural fire in an old office building that was used as informal housing, very high density. At first, we thought we only had 1 body, but we realized while doing the declaration that what we had thought was the body's humerus was actually all that was left of a baby. The fire had been so intense that the skull had fused with the concrete floor and been crushed by debris. Looked almost like a sooty black, slightly 3D image of a small screaming monkey. That's an image and smell that it took months to get out of my head. Still pops back every now and then, if someone burns pork mainly. Those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head, but there are many more. I was taking a girl approximate 14 years old to the emergency room for behavioral crisis because her family said she was bipolar and having an episode. Anyways, as I'm in the back with her, she looks right past me with very distant, cold stare, but in my direction and says, "Joe, is that you?" I could tell she was hallucinating for some reason, so I just documented it and didn't overthink it. Later, as I returned to the ER, I followed up with the nurse and found out she apparently was molested by her uncle a few weeks prior, and his name was Joe. I'm a retired cop who used to get calls related to incidents where the EMTs arrived first. The creepiest is the kids who let their grandmother die instead of taking her to the hospital so that they could keep her rent-controlled apartment. None of them gave a fuck about the old lady. They were primarily concerned about which one of them would inherit the apartment. They also had been living off of her pension check, the widow's portion of her husband's pension, her social security, and an annuity. I was never so happy to be able to arrest such ugly people in my career. Of course, the night was still young. I got to see worse.